Hey, how are
Hey, how are
you?
you? I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Doing well.
Oh, I'm glad this is actually working. I love it. It's funny. It's like I'm on calls, I'm on Zoom calls all day long, and I'm still surprised that it actually works great when I might and get one of these interviews. So it's fantastic.
Video conferencing is widely considered the most difficult problem in technology.
I
So,
know it's like it's I think even worse than power. Actually having power. This is great. It was great to meet you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about, and we'll go from there.
great. So, I've been an entrepreneur for 12 years, always based here in New York. And primarily, I've been building products for consumers. So, people like you and I, and primarily for them to use on their phones. So, iPhone apps, mobile apps of all sorts. And if you're familiar with stories and Instagram or Snapchat, my last company, we built a product called Days, which pioneered the idea of 24-hour forward chronological sharing. So the idea of sharing moments throughout your day in the order that you created them as a way of seeing what your friends are up to, documenting your own life. And really the question that we were interested in there is, how do you stay informed with what your friends are doing? And we felt that some of the dominant products in social media at the time, which were focused on primarily sharing highlights from your life, didn't do a great job of capturing the actual richness of what was going on. And so we built this product to be really a much more intimate version of that, and sold the company to Yahoo back in 2014, joined Yahoo after that, worked on new product innovation there on the product management side, and spent about a year there building some cool stuff, and then
You and I actually
left.
have a common employer then.
There it is. That's an old logo.
I was at Yahoo from '04 to '09. So that's very, very cool. So what'd you say the name of that app was? It sounded really interesting.
That was called Days. And the idea of the name came from the fact that you were sharing your day. So 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was the early version of what we now know as stories, which is a format that's really taken over the world and is quite related to what we've built at River, very much informed that. So what we were doing at Days was really about this idea that you've got friends. How do you stay in touch with them? How do you stay up to date on what's going on in their life and share what's going on in your life with them? And River's based around this idea that alongside your friends, you also have other interests. So non-social interests. You might be interested in football and physics and US politics, for instance. And so we were asking ourselves, how do you stay up to date on all the things that you're interested in? And one of the things that we noticed is all of the places that you do this now are oriented around people. So you go on Twitter and you follow people, or you go on Facebook and you friend people, or you follow brands and that kind of thing. And one of the things that we noticed is that people are actually bad proxies for interest, because if I follow a Nobel winning physicist hoping to get their thoughts on physics, but they happen to be a Yankees fan and their whole Twitter feed is baseball arcana, then
Yep.
I'm not exactly getting the thing that I signed up for. And
Yep.
this is one of the tricky problems when you're orienting around people, because people are vast, right? We have all sorts of different interests, and so a product that's designed to connect us with people is ultimately a little bit at odds with a product that's designed to connect us to our interests. And we felt that there wasn't anything good for that in the space at the end of the day. And so we started working on this company and product that became River. And the idea behind River is that we instantly organize everything that people are talking about online, from sports to science, in the Times and on Twitter, into a personalized stream of bite-sized shareable stories that hopefully gets better as you use it. And one of the key ideas here is that this is not just about traditional news, but really new information on any interest that you might have, from beauty to gaming. And so another way to think about what we're doing is that we're building an interest graph. And so we're connecting you with the things that you're interested in and figuring out the links between all of that. And so we've built this product for what we consider to be a very modern type of consumer. And I think this profile is quite common now, particularly among the Gen Z and millennial demographic. But these are people who skim rather than go deep. They like to triangulate multiple perspectives to build trust. They use and love products like Stories, Snapchat, and TikTok, and they want all the products that they use to feel kind of like that. And they get informed from non-traditional formats and platforms. So they're learning about things through social posts, through GIFs, and through memes. And we can get into all of these things later on in the conversation. But I think this has led us to build a product that feels a lot more like a social app or an entertainment product than it does a news app, for instance. So we're more spiritually connected to something like TikTok than we are to Apple News. And that really gets conveyed throughout the product experience. And we try to present a mix of serious and fun topics, professional and amateur content, and then different formats as well, from tweets to YouTube videos to articles and so forth. And we want to make it really easy for you to browse many stories quickly, get multiple perspectives on any topic, and then finally, turn your interests into social objects that can be shared to third-party platforms like Twitter or Facebook, Stories, TikTok, Snapchat, etc., to express yourself or to start and enrich social interactions.
Right. So I played with it a little bit, and it just still continued. It still felt like a bit of a news app, right? There, I didn't see the people behind the scenes. I mean, I saw a lot of head content that I'd see typically, and there were a few stories that I wouldn't have seen specifically in my view. So how do you come up with that initial feed? Let's say I don't know anything, you don't know anything about me. I've logged in. How do I get my initial feed so it knows what I like, other than the fact that
so
explicitly say?
Sure. We have a pretty straightforward, lightweight onboarding where we ask some questions about the types of things that you're interested in. So you can identify gaming, politics, et cetera. And so some of those are going to be dominated by mainstream figures largely. So politics, world news, et cetera. When you start to get into something like gaming or mixed martial arts, that's where you're probably going to get some of the more niche voices. But we do a lot to try to deal with misinformation. It's something I'm sure we'll talk about, but we want to be really careful with these very mainstream topics that you're getting high quality and reliable information there.
That's interesting. So I did see that at the very top, but then I don't know where this stuff is coming from, other than, okay, this all seems to be very similar head content to what I've already been seeing. I mean, how does it tune itself to my desires?
Yeah, so sure. As you use it, we're learning about what you're liking, what you're sharing, the way that you're interacting with content, and then similarly how other people on the platform are interacting with that content as well. And we've built really sophisticated, what we call content understanding technology. And this technology attempts to really understand the topics, the concepts, the people, the places that are what comprise a given YouTube video or a tweet or an article and so forth. And so we're able, with very little information about you as the user, because we know so much about the content, to give pretty personalized recommendations there.
Yeah, because one of the things I noticed is that there was a bunch of things that I wanted to basically not see anymore, and I couldn't just say, "Oh yeah, I don't want to see this anymore." I mean, is that a feature that you purposely left out?
Yeah, so we kind of have taken the approach of tell us what you like and we'll show you more of what you like, as opposed to tell us what you don't like, because it's so easy to to kind of cancel something out and then complain when you're not shown it, right? So it's like,
but isn't
okay,
canceling the way things go nowadays? Isn't canceling more? It's like people are so negative that they can see what they want to cancel first, but they don't want to see what they want to keep.
That may be the case. I mean, people certainly like to cancel online these days. It's become quite popular. We try to stay above that fray as much as we can. So we want to be a place that's quite positive and encouraging. And I think that that's something that helps us set ourselves apart.
So can you tell me a little bit about the algorithm and how it operates? So I'm scrolling through these news items, and does it say, oh, this person stayed on this news item for a couple seconds, like watched the video and then moved on to the next one, or you just swiped right by, and that's how you can tell that they're a little more interested in this item or that item? How can I work the algorithm? I was a friend of mine who was at Facebook, and I kept complaining to him that my feed sucked, and he goes, well, you're not spending enough time working on it so that it'll know what you're looking for and what you're not looking for. So how would I do that with River?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought up that Facebook example, because I'll just start there, and because I know a little bit about how they've built the ranking for newsfeed, and this question of, I don't like the way that my news feed is tuned. I'm not getting content that I'm interested in. I don't want the algorithm to do it. Just show me it reverse chronologically. This is a complaint that many people have had, and people think that they want more control over these things. But in every experiment where they're given more control, they tune their feeds in such a way that they actually get very little value out of it. And so it turns out that these implicit signals, looking at what people actually do rather than what they say, is a much better way to give people content that they're in fact interested in. Because at the end of the day, it turns out a lot of us don't really know ourselves super well. And so if we as a product are able to look
statement. I love that. It's we don't really know ourselves, but the algorithms do know us better than we know ourselves, right? And that's true.
In some cases, that's true. TikTok is a great example of that, and it can be a little disturbing to folks at times, and we actually don't go super hard in that direction. So you can really tune that up the way that TikTok has done it, where it's like very quickly your algorithm can become dominated by something, and that transformation can happen very quickly. When you're building these types of products, you can tune it to various degrees of sensitivity to determine how quickly that transformation can happen. We prefer to go more slowly and be a little bit more paced about how that's happening, because I think it can be, when you put that in front of somebody, sometimes people don't like the reflection that right. These things show them. And there's certain types of content that tends to be super engaging. And so we actually don't look at engagement that much. We look more at the signals about the actual content itself and things that you're interested in. So it's less about how long you're spending on something. It's more, oh, you're spending time on a piece of content that contains these 7 topics, which is by this author and this publisher, and that relates to these other topics that you've explicitly expressed interest in, that you've shared before, things like that are a little bit safer versions of signals. But this may be a good time to get into misinformation and media literacy, because I think it's all quite connected here. And so if you look at what's happening on other platforms, if you've optimized your algorithms around what's engaging, and so you're trying to increase the amount of time that people are spending on your platform, what happens is content that's quite controversial ends up being super engaging. People engage with it positively, and people engage with it negatively. So it's polarizing. And that content in that sort of system rises to the top. We really wanted to avoid that. So we really tried to look at these other factors besides that. And so if you think about what comprises media literacy, you want people to cross-check information with additional sources. You want people to be able to evaluate the credibility of authors and sources that they're looking at. You want people to be able to understand the presence of journalistic standards or the lack thereof. And when you don't have the ability to do that, you end up with band-aid solutions like we're seeing on the big platforms, which are these warning labels on content. And that's a function of presenting content out of context to people. That's a function
of— It's 100% that. It's 100% contextual. I mean, it's just so much news and so much, of this information is pulled out of context and displayed to elicit some type of additional engagement, whether it's positive or negative. And you're right. I mean, these things are engagement machines, right? That's all they do is they try to like ramp up your engagement as much as humanly possible, and they don't really care whether you're getting real information or misinformation. They just want to ramp up engagement. And that's where you guys are different, which is interesting because it's kind of counterintuitive when you think about what you're trying to do, is that you're trying to get people to use the app, but at the same time, you're not necessarily rewarding engagement.
Right. And when you are getting content that's in a feed, and the only reason that you're getting it is because it was shared by somebody you happen to connect to because you went to high school with them or something like that, then you have these band-aid solutions like the warning labels. And I've seen some discussions, should platforms require people to take a media literacy quiz? Should they have buttons and popovers and things like that to educate people? I'm not very optimistic about how well any of those solutions are going to work, because they're at odds with the core design of these products. And we tried to address this at the very beginning with how we design the product. And so I mentioned before, one of the things that we built this to do is allow you to triangulate multiple sources to build trust and to be able to do so very quickly. And so the core functionality of our app is called View Full Coverage. And so anytime you see a piece of content in our app, you can click this big button that says View Full Coverage, and it's going to show you all the different perspectives that we've indexed about that same topic. And we're using machine learning to figure out, okay, these are a cluster of tweets, videos, articles that are all about this same topic. And that topic is going to be quite narrow, actually. And so when Trump was president, there would be 20 or 30 different Trump topics that were discrete from each other every day. So it's not just Trump as a topic, it's Trump, North Korea at this time and on this day is a particular topic. And here's all the tweets, here's all the articles, here's all the videos about that. And what that does, what our product is telling you to do, is it's saying, hey, here's this topic. Don't just stay with this one piece of content, actually dive in, look at what everybody is saying about it. And that obviates the need for a warning label, because now very quickly you can see if a tweet is saying that Trump won the election. Well, that tweet says that all the other tweets and all the articles say something else. And we're presenting all that information to you right in the product experience. And the design of the app is such that you're encouraged to go and do that. And I think that's really important, right? Because a lot of the problems that we have with misinformation stem from not from the existence of this information or its availability to people who are determined to seek that out, but rather when you're serving this information to people who are never looking for it in the first place, or were looking for something innocuous. And an example of this would be the 7th grader who's doing their geography homework, and they do a search on YouTube, and they watch a video and they see another video in the sidebar, and they click on that, and in 3 clicks, now they're into some flat earth content, on YouTube, and suddenly they're like, oh, well, I used to think the world is round, but now I've seen the light. Thank you, YouTube, for letting me know about this critical conspiracy, which my teachers are perpetuating. And that's really a function of how these things are designed. And that's the problem, right? It was never a problem that you could have Googled flat Earth previously to that and found it. That's always existed, right? Like, these books are in the library, these theories are on the internet. I don't think that's actually such a big problem. The fact that this stuff exists out there somewhere, and if you want to go find it, you can. I think people kind of have the right to go
Absolutely
publish that and find it. The problem is when you as a service serve that to somebody who wasn't looking for it. That's where it becomes problematic, and it becomes really problematic when you do it a lot. And it turns out that because people get into these flame wars in the comments of something like that, because half the people are saying this is amazing, half the people are saying this is, utter garbage. And so then that ends up rising to the top.
I mean, at one point I told myself, the most interesting thing is not actually the content itself. It's all the back and forth and the commentary on the content, right? Because that's where you see all of this back and forth and the flaming going on. And that's the stuff that seems really interesting to me, as opposed to the commentary, as opposed to the actual content itself. But like you say, a lot of that is just, churning. None of it's reality. None of it's factual.
Yeah. I mean, I wish there was a place to get the really high quality of that back and forth. It's hard to get the signal in the noise on that, but certainly there are some good comments there. That's the promise of a great Reddit experience. When you can find it, they can be few and far between, but when it's good, it's really good. Yeah. And certain websites have great comment sections.
Yeah. Well, see, this is the thing. I've been saying this for a while now, is that we don't really get how responsible we are personally for the spread of this kind of information. I mean, we just look at something and within a millisecond, and the platforms are designed for this. They're designed for you not to look deeply into the thing that you're going to share before you share it. It's just like, oh, I'm having an instant reaction. My thinking fast reaction is, I got to share this, right? And what we really need to do is stop and say, wait a second, I'm responsible for moving this forward. I'm responsible for its virality. So if I just thought about this for a second and did a little bit of research, maybe I shouldn't be sharing this because I don't want to spread misinformation. But people aren't, and the systems are not even designed to do that. And I'm assuming you've sort of cracked that nut, and you're able to stop people from sharing stuff that's obviously incorrect.
Well, so we try not to serve you that incorrect content in the first place, right? Because our feed so when you think about the stories that we choose to show you, so at the top level, here's a story about Trump, here's a story about the NHL, here's a story about the Mars mission. Well, how have we picked those stories? We've picked them on the basis of many different signals, but at a high level way of thinking about is one of the very important things we look at is how many people have written about that story, and what is the caliber of the publications, the quality of the publications that have written about it on a per category basis, right? So if Rolling Stone publishes something and that piece is about music, they're a very credible source for music. They're a somewhat less credible source for US politics information, whereas the New York Times is the reverse situation. They're super credible for politics. Maybe Rolling Stone is more credible for music. And so we're looking at that at the top level to figure out what stories to show you. So we don't have a situation on our service where some clickbaity article can rise to about a story that's not a real story, can rise to the top. So if you think about Pizzagate, if one person publishes something about Pizzagate, that single post can take off on a platform like Twitter or Facebook, right? Because that's can be very engaging. And the same can happen with a meme, for instance. And memes have become one of the biggest vectors for misinformation because they're visual content, very hard for these machine learning based systems to identify and understand what's happening in a meme.
Yep.
Humans are also often not that good at understanding what's happening in a meme. And the computers are certainly not as good as the humans for that yet. But because these things that are not real stories can go viral on these other platforms, that's a huge problem. On our service, that can't happen because we're saying, well, okay, yes, this meme exists here, but nobody else is, that's the story of this meme has not been covered by anybody else. This is just this isolated thing that happens to have high engagement on it, but it's not actually connected to anything else. So that's not going to surface. And then within a story, we're showing you perspectives on that story. And this is probably why your initial impression is that, you know, you're seeing a lot of mainstream publications, because we're weighting the credibility of each of those publications in ordering how we're going to show you the perspectives on that story. So we want to be really sure that the perspectives that we're showing you on a given topic are the most reliable ones first. And the deeper you go into that, you're going to start to get into that longer tail of it, what we call the man on the couch YouTube style videos, where it's like often somebody on a couch with a wall hanging of some sort behind them. I don't know why this format of interior design is so popular among people who like to make commentary on YouTube, but it happens to be an aesthetic sensibility that seems quite pervasive. I imagine this would be a good dissertation for somebody in cultural studies. So, yeah.
You know, what's interesting there is that I think you're absolutely right. But I always want to look at the tail content in more detail. And I think we do the tail content a disservice by always assuming that it's not as credible as the head content, because the head content has got its, you know, they have their own agenda as well, right? I mean, head content has an agenda. For sure. Has their own agenda. And I think the tail content is actually a bit less agendaless, because on the one hand, they probably just want to share, right? If you think about something like a skiing, right? If I was interested in skiing and I get Skiing Magazine, then I'd probably be getting all sorts of ads on, you know, ski equipment. But if I'm a skier and I have a blog, and you're not showing me that blog, and there's like a really interesting travelogue of him skiing down a particular mountain or whatever that I would like to see, but Google's not going to show that to me because, you know, it's tail and it's not bringing them any cash. I mean, would River like bring that to me at some point if that was the case?
So over time, that's the idea. One of the challenges we have, to set the stage for the listeners, we launched only a couple months ago. So we're a very new product. And so what we want to do is we want to understand the credibility of something when we show it to you. And so you're absolutely right. Some skier who has a blog may produce extraordinary content. The question for us is, how do we ascertain that that's extraordinary content? And so the first version of what we launched was built before we had users. So the initial version of our ranking is using exclusively signals about the content itself, right? Because day one, we don't have users doing anything with that content to tell us anything besides what we've gathered from that content, and then however well that content has done on whatever platform that it's on. So maybe it is on Twitter and it has a bunch of likes and retweets and the account is followed by somebody else. Or if it's a web page, it has things like PageRank and so forth. And we're looking at all those signals. But now that we're live, what we're starting to do with this user data is saying, okay, is there tail content that people are engaging with at a higher rate than this head content? And in what category are they engaging in it? And so we're trying to, as we go, algorithmically figure out, oh, this particular skiing blog is making content that people really seem to enjoy. And so as they do that, the credibility of that content in our system and in our ranking is able to increase. And so over time, you'll see some of those, that very good tail content start to become more prominent.
Would there be a way for me to actually put that in? Like or would I have to wait for River to present it to me?
So when you say put it in, clarify for me.
I love this blog. It's an awesome blog. I want to share it with other skiing enthusiasts. Is there a way for me to say to River, hey, this I find amazingly credible and interesting in my particular interest field? How do I like push it into River and say, hey, this is something you guys should want to look at?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't quite have a way for you to do that right now. It's something that we've thought about for the roadmap. So there's two issues. One is that blog may well be something that we're ingesting already, because we go out to the web and, like a search engine, we're crawling various web pages, we're crawling these platforms to ingest that content. So that may well be, there's kind of two issues. One of the issues is we're ingesting it, but you're just not seeing it because it's not ranked highly. The second is we're not ingesting it. So in the first case, it's there, we're ingesting it, but it's probably buried somewhere. And so the key there is to kind of find it, and you could use our search functionality in order to do that. The second question is, okay, we're not indexing this source. For things like skiing, we don't even have a category for skiing yet. So we have to, that's something that's an even higher order question, which is, hey, I'm a skiing enthusiast. Like, why don't you let me pick skiing as a category? And it's a fair question. We would love to do that. We have to build classifiers for our machine learning model to be able to identify a skiing article versus a snowboarding article, for instance, and be able to distinguish those. And we've done that for things like football, like professional football and college football, professional basketball, college basketball, things like that. So we have to, there's a little bit of work when we want to add new categories, because we want to make sure that our ability to do that is really accurate. And we're not using human labeling here. So we want to do it all algorithmically to minimize bias as much as we can, because we don't want to be saying, oh, this is a great source. We want to just train something and look at the language that's actually used when writing about a skiing article and be able to say, this is skiing. And that way we can get skiing content, not just from a blog that only publishes skiing content, which is how most news apps would work, but we can find the skiing content in the New York Times or in Time Magazine or Rolling Stone, for that matter, wherever it is, because we've built a model that understands the types of language that are used to talk about skiing. And we can differentiate, we can go find that within a publisher, even if that publisher typically talks about something else.
Right. Okay. I'd like to pivot a little bit to your startup experience, or your startup journey, I guess you could call it. And I don't know if you want to talk about your current startup or your prior startup. I mean, you're a startup, you've only been around for a few months. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about like a particular story or a challenge that you overcame and how you did it, like something inspiring for our listeners?
Sure. So like I mentioned, I've been doing this for a dozen years at this point. So have built many products and a couple companies, and I love doing side projects as well. A fun one that we built in 2016 was actually called Call to Action, and this was a product that allowed you to call your Congress people really easily.
Nice.
And that became kind of quite popular. But I'll give you an example from our recent company that I think is pretty interesting. So we were working on River for a year and a half or so, and March 2020, the world starts to end. So COVID happens, a few months later, George Floyd killing happens, and so things are kind of falling apart. And we haven't launched our service yet, but we're paying very close attention to how people are responding to these events, how that's changed the way that people are speaking and communicating online. And we're thinking, we're looking at all these behaviors that are emerging. And some of the things that we saw people doing is that people were starting to use these visual sharing platforms like Stories and like TikTok to first person share resources and information about these events. And so there was this fragmentation of media, which obviously had already started. We call it social media for a reason, but this felt really new. This felt like, all your friends were suddenly their own broadcasters in a way that really hadn't been before. And this was broadcast or attempting to broadcast much harder facts, right? This is not just what you ate for lunch or the party that you went to last night, but this is, here's where you can find N95 masks. Here's how to disinfect your bags and things like that. And so
it's like distributed citizen journalism. Basically, it really pushed the boundaries of it way beyond sort of like the official sources.
Yes, exactly. And so we saw that happening, and we saw an opportunity to build a new product that catered to those behaviors and would make those behaviors more powerful. So what we were seeing is that either people were doing selfie video and they were speaking to the camera and sharing some information, and that of course is quite engaging, but again, it's lacking context. So people are flipping through, they might not have the audio on, it's kind of hard to process that. Are you really going to be taking notes at the same time as you're watching this video? And then alternatively, people were also sharing resources, so these text posts. And so they were posting an Instagram slideshow with a bunch of tiles that were text, or they're putting that onto their story. And we thought it would be cool if there was a way to combine those behaviors. And so we ended up building a product called Overflow. And Overflow is a browser. So you can go to any website, and we use Rivers technology to surface some websites that we think you might want to go to based on what's happening in the news. So things that you might want to respond to kind of give you a set of shortcuts or quick links to get to popular content. And we created this experience. You go to one of those sources and it has selfie video on it as well. And so it's actually recording you as you're browsing any website on the internet. And then you can share that video out to Snapchat, to TikTok, to Twitter.
So it captures your video and the thing you're browsing and shares the entire experience?
Exactly. So you get a single recording that is a screen recording of what you're browsing with your selfie video overlaid on it. And it can be overlaid like one-to-one, we call it Black Mirror. So it's kind of like a transparency effect, or you can do picture in picture where the browser is the full screen and the selfie video is inset. And then you can talk to exactly the resources that you're referring to. And that ended up really taking off and becoming a cool thing for people to share resources around these events. And so we looked at that as a really great, and we built this in less than a month. And this was like 2 people on our team. We had the idea. It's like one part of our team
startup. You have your own skunkworks. That's hilarious.
Yeah,
you probably aren't very big anyway, but it's amazing that the levels of iteration here are very cool.
It was cool because one part of our team was ahead of another part. So our app was kind of ready to launch, but we were still working on some DevOps stuff before we actually wanted to put it out into the market, just to make sure we could scale. So we had one of our designers, one of our iOS engineers, just create this experience and put it into the store. And that was really cool. And so I think it's a great example of responding very quickly to something that's happening in the world, just spinning something up and having fun with it, trying to solve a problem that people seem to be having. And it doesn't take a lot of resources, it doesn't take a lot of time, and you can do this stuff quite quickly.
Well, it sounds very similar to how Twitter basically was birthed out of Odeo, right? I mean, Odeo was a completely different thing, and Twitter was designed for Odeo customers. And then they ended up pivoting to Twitter. I mean, is there a chance that you guys might pivot to Overflow, or is that pretty much out and done?
I think that what's going to happen with Overflow is we're going to integrate that functionality into River itself. And so that was a great test for us to see if this format was interesting to people. We feel pretty good about it. And I think it makes a lot of sense inside the River experience. But it's funny to think about Odeo and Twitter, because Odeo was a podcasting company, but really before podcasting. And what's ironic to think about is that may actually have been the bigger company at the end of the day, because podcasting has turned out to as an industry be bigger than tweeting is. So who knows what would have happened if they'd stuck with it.
Exactly. But it's interesting, because then you look at things like Flickr and Slack, or like Stuart Butterfield's Pivot. But they're both pivots of the gaming company that he originally wanted to start. So you never know if it's the pivot or not, but it really comes down to what's going to capture the imagination of the market, and what they're gonna love, right?
And you really never know. Instagram was another pivot. It started out as a location sharing app, a competitor to Foursquare and Gowalla at the time, called Bourbon. And they it's actually funny, I never got this wordplay, but they distilled that idea down to Instagram, and the rest is history. I think Clubhouse was, that was kind of a pivot. I don't know if they had launched another product first, but I think that was a kind of like last hurrah idea that they had come up with as well. So
I love the intimacy. I love voice, because it's something more intimate about voice than there is about audio, video. But it's still kind of in a weird situation. I love the ephemeralness of Clubhouse. It's like you're listening to it, and then when it's done, it's done. There's no recording. And I think that's almost the most interesting piece of it, is the ephemeral part of it.
Yeah. And, I expect that what will happen with that is going to be similar to what happened with the ephemerality of stories, where stories now are both ephemeral and not. So they're publicly ephemeral, but they're saved to a private archive, and then you can pull that out of your archive to use for whatever you want later. I think that it definitely reduces the barrier to sharing when this is not when it's not put in people's face that this is going to be saved. But I think we're already seeing people violating the rules on Clubhouse and recording some of those conversations. So I'll be curious to see how long the no recording thing lasts. But I agree with you. That is, in an ideal world, that's great. I think I'd love for them to maintain that as long as possible, because I think it's super interesting, but it poses all sorts of discovery challenges for them, ranking challenges. Because what they're going to have to do
is a business model without the recording. I mean, that's the key, but that's kind of like the beauty of it. It's kind of like brings us back to the time when we did have no recording capability, and you had to be in attendance to see these things. That makes them more special. I mean, I have a son who's a pianist, and he says, back when this first began, there were no recording devices, and you had to experience the chamber music in the chamber. And then when it was done, it was done. You could never hear it again. And that same piece could never be played the same way. And we're so used to recording now that we've kind of lost touch with that, but there's still some magic to the ability for these things to just be gone forever.
I agree.
Well, anyway, so let's get to the future. So it's 2031. Where are things going to be? Where's River going to be in 2031? Have you guys cornered the market on news, or where do you think you're going to be in 2031? Where do you think the world will be in 2031?
Yeah, so one of the things that we thought about a lot early on is where the world was going and what is going to be true in the future. And one of the things that we saw is that information is getting faster and faster and faster. And so it's being produced more quickly, and we want to be able to consume it more quickly and more closely to the time that it's being produced. And something interesting to think about is, even when we were growing up, when we were consuming a piece of content, chances are that piece of content had been around for decades, right? The content that we produce now, or that we consume now, 95% of it didn't exist a day ago, right? Almost all of the content that we consume in our lives was just produced. And so we thought long and hard about that fact. And we said, well, if that's going to continue to be if that's going to get increasingly more true, what are you going to want to be good at a company to deal with that? And that's actually what was kind of the seed idea for River is, can we get really good at figuring out what's happening in the world right now in real time? And so the way that our system is designed is, as content is being published, we're ingesting it. We're figuring out what that content is about. We're figuring out what topic, what categories, what topics, what people, et cetera. And we're matching those with the interests of people and giving them that content right away. And we built, and that's why we spent so much time building systems that understand the content itself and that don't have to wait to see how that content performs. If you think about TikTok's algorithm, the way that it works is it's sampling. So it's saying, here's a video, we're going to show it to 100 people. We're going to see how well that video performs with those 100 people. If it does really well, we're going to show it to 1,000 people. If it does well with 1,000, 10,000, 100, right? And it's these expanding circles that you're exposing this content to. That's great for evergreen content. So, a monkey who likes to open packages, this is one of my favorite TikTok, and it's hilarious. This little monkey that somebody has in their house.
I gotta check that out. I don't recall that, but I'll see if I can find it.
It's fantastic. But that's as interesting to me 10 years from now as it is now. So you've got lots of time to collect signal on that. Of all the people who make monkey videos, you could find, the guy who makes the best monkey videos and serve that to me. And if I haven't seen that, like, evergreen, serve it to me. I probably can even watch the same one again. We're dealing with content that loses its relevancy very quickly. And that's the nature and the characteristic of most of the content that is now getting created. And so we wanted to be really good at being able to deliver that content to you as quickly as possible, because the slower you are, it just doesn't matter anymore after a certain point. And so the direction that we're going in is to become increasingly good at that. And what we think is going to happen is we're going to move to platforms and to technologies that present that context to us in a more immediate way. So think about AR. I think that in 10 years, we're not going to have to take out our phone and hold it up to our face and like open an app. This stuff is just going to be presented to us in a heads up way. And so what we're trying to do is figure out what's going on in the world that's related to your interests immediately and be able to serve that to you immediately. And what we're building towards is that world where the technology it doesn't go away. It's always there for you. And so we're able to surface relevant stuff to you at the right time in real time the content that's just getting produced that's most relevant to you right now. So that's the world that we think is going to happen, and that's how we've been designing this product.
That's really interesting. I mean, it makes me think about relevancy. Is relevancy driven by humanity? I mean, are humans saying, I want the novelty, I want the new, or are the systems saying, well, let's drive the new into people? Like who's driving what? I mean, on the one hand, yes, we do want the novelty, but on the other hand, is it the engines that are just giving us new stuff and they're just constantly churning new stuff on their own so that they can drive engagement?
Well, I think humans are novelty seeking machines. So there's no question that we love novelty.
Yeah.
I think it should be balanced with the classics. So there's information that is not novel that we're going to want to surface to people as well. But we saw that as the easier problem. That's kind of the solved problem. And so, you do some pretty easy work with Wikipedia and geofencing, and you can, annotate the world with that classic knowledge that largely, I think, has already solved problems. And very quickly, just kind of finding out the right interface for that once AR becomes more pervasive, that didn't seem like the real opportunity. Also, the players in that evergreen space are very well established, very good at what they do, very hard to compete with a Wikipedia or a Google for that type of content. But they're really not good at this real-time content. So that's where we saw the opportunity for us to play.
Although in 10 years, you guys might actually be the font of all real knowledge, right? Because you've put it through filters and have said, well, this stuff is the real stuff. So we're looking back on what you're creating in 2021 might actually be more accurate than what anybody else is capturing. Because look at Wikipedia, right? I mean, it can be changed so quickly by anybody, and it just needs constant adult supervision to keep it accurate.
Absolutely. And we do plan to get into that evergreen content later, but this is to use Chris Dixon's framework. This is our narrow edge of the wedge. This is where the opportunity felt like was greatest for us to enter the market. And then we can stand on the shoulders of giants for that other stuff.
Fantastic. Well, I love it so far. I'll keep sending you notes if I run into any trouble with it. But this is great. So any other contact information, just go to the App Store. Are you on Android as well?
We're just on iOS at the moment. Okay. So the website is river.app, and that is a link to download the service, and you can find us on social media as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. It was great talking with you. I'm gonna check it out, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, sir.
Great to connect. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.